The numbers flash across the screen in relentless succession, each one more staggering than the last. The global debt clock ticks past $315 trillion. The United States, $34 trillion. Japan, $13 trillion. China, $47 trillion. The United Kingdom, $3 trillion. The digits spin faster and faster, a blur of financial obligation that seems to defy the very laws of mathematical gravity. This isn't just a number on a screen. This is a silent earthquake, rumbling beneath the foundation of the global economy. And most people are completely unaware of the ground shifting beneath their feet. This is the story of the silent debt crisis. It's not a dramatic collapse like 2008, with banks failing and stock markets crashing in plain sight. This is a slow, insidious, and far more dangerous phenomenon. It's the story of why every single country in the world, from the richest superpower to the smallest developing nation, is borrowing money at a pace never before seen in human history. And it's the story of what happens when the bill finally comes due. The roots of this crisis were planted in 2008. In the aftermath of the global financial meltdown, central banks around the world did the only thing they could to prevent a second Great Depression. They turned on the money printers. Interest rates were slashed to zero, and in some cases, even below zero. Quantitative easing, the process of creating new money to buy government bonds, became the new normal. For over a decade, money was not just cheap, it was practically free. Governments, facing sluggish growth and popular pressure for spending, did what anyone would do when offered free money. They borrowed. And they borrowed. And they borrowed. They borrowed to fund tax cuts. They borrowed to fund social programs. They borrowed to build infrastructure. They borrowed to fight wars. They borrowed to simply keep the lights on. It was a party where the tab was being put on a credit card, with no limit and no minimum payment. Then, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. The global economy screeched to a halt. In response, governments unleashed the largest peacetime borrowing spree in history. The United States passed multi-trillion-dollar relief packages. The European Union suspended its own debt rules. Countries from Japan to Brazil saw their debt-to-GDP ratios explode overnight. It was a necessary lifeboat in a hurricane. But now the storm has passed, and we're left drifting in a sea of red ink with no land in sight. The problem is simple, yet terrifyingly complex. The era of free money is over. The inflation genie is out of the bottle. To combat soaring prices, central banks have been forced to do the one thing they'd avoided for 15 years, raise interest rates aggressively and rapidly. This has thrown the silent debt crisis into sharp, unforgiving relief. Imagine a homeowner with a massive interest-only mortgage. For years, their monthly payment was a manageable $500. Then, suddenly, their adjustable rate resets. The United States, the world's economic engine, is now spending more on interest payments on its national debt than on its entire national defense budget. Every single minute, millions of dollars are transferred from American taxpayers to the holders of U.S. Treasury bonds just to service the interest, not even to pay down the principal. This is money that isn't building new roads, isn't funding scientific research, and isn't educating children. It's simply being burned to maintain the status quo. As interest rates remain higher for longer, this figure is projected to become the single largest line item in the entire federal budget, dwarfing Social Security and Medicare. It is a fiscal doomsday machine that is quietly ticking away in the background of American life. But the crisis is not confined to the rich world. In fact, it is in the developing nations where the situation is most acute and most tragic. A cascade of countries, Sri Lanka, Ghana, Zambia, Ethiopia, have already defaulted on their debts. They are now trapped in a brutal cycle of austerity and despair. When a country defaults, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank step in with bailout loans. But these loans come with structural adjustment conditions: slash government spending, cut subsidies on food and fuel, privatize state-owned industries, and devalue the currency. The result is economic shock therapy for the population. The price of bread triples overnight. Fuel becomes unaffordable. Public services like healthcare and education collapse. We are witnessing the creation of lost generations in these nations, all because of debts that were often accumulated by corrupt leaders and lent by irresponsible creditors. The creditor landscape has also fundamentally changed, making the crisis even more difficult to resolve. In the past, when a developing country got into debt trouble, its creditors were primarily Western governments and the Paris Club. Negotiations were messy but manageable. Today, China has become the world's largest creditor, having lent trillions of dollars through its Belt and Road Initiative to over 150 countries. China is not a member of the Paris Club and operates with a very different, more opaque playbook. Its loans often come with strict confidentiality clauses and demands for strategic assets as collateral. When countries like Zambia or Sri Lanka can't pay, they find themselves negotiating not in a transparent forum, but in secret bilateral talks with Beijing, often having to hand over control of ports, mines, or other national infrastructure. This is creating a new form of 21st century colonialism, not based on territorial occupation, but on financial dependency. Meanwhile, private creditors, hedge funds, and vulture funds circle like sharks. They buy up a country's defaulted debt for pennies on the dollar and then use litigation in international courts to demand full repayment, plus interest and penalties. They have successfully seized everything from an Argentine naval ship to funds from a central bank in a New York account. For indebted nations, there is no clean escape. So why do countries keep borrowing if the consequences are so dire? The answer is a terrifying trap. For most governments, there is no politically palatable alternative. Raising taxes is unpopular. Cutting popular spending programs is political suicide. Printing money to pay the bills leads to hyperinflation, as we've seen in Zimbabwe and Venezuela. So they are left with only one option: issue more debt to pay off the old debt. It's a Ponzi scheme on a global sovereign scale. The system is predicated on the belief that someone will always be willing to lend more. But what if that belief is wrong? The endgame of this silent crisis is not a single catastrophic event. It will be a long, slow bleed. It will be the gradual erosion of public services in rich countries as more and more tax revenue is diverted to bondholders. It will be the constant social unrest in developing nations as populations are crushed under austerity measures. It will be the slow suffocation of economic growth as capital that should be invested in productive businesses is instead sucked into the black hole of government debt service. It will be a permanent state of financial fragility where any shock, another pandemic, a major war, a climate disaster could trigger a chain reaction of defaults that the system is no longer resilient enough to absorb. The screen returns to the global debt clock, the numbers still spinning upwards, seemingly unstoppable. The silence of this crisis is its most dangerous feature. There are no bank runs, no headlines screaming about collapse. There's only the quiet, relentless accumulation of obligations that future generations will have to bear. The bill for the last 2 decades of excess is being written right now, and it is being left on the doorstep of our children. The silent debt crisis is no longer a prediction. It is our present reality, and the clock is still ticking.